And welcome to episode 4 of the After the Ninth podcast, your insider Chuckwagon podcast. I'm Cass Patterson here with Dayton Sutherland, and when I say here with, I'm actually in person. How are you doing, Dayton?
Great, Cass. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So I guess let's start off with last weekend. We joked about you defending your title, but you ended up actually going and doing just that. What was that like?
It was different than most of the other shows, or I shouldn't say most of the other shows, that I've been competitive at and whatnot, only for the reason because I actually thought that I wholeheartedly believed that I was going to win this one after you actually put it in my head, 3-4 days before. And I can't remember if I said it on the other podcast. I said it in another piece of media that I did, it just kind of looked really similar to last year. And just being that, I was in the first heat this year, I was in the second last year. Horses were just starting to come together finally, which seems to be a reoccurring theme in my barn, something I probably have to tackle so I can get them working earlier on in the year, but that's besides the point. I don't know. Just the track gives the advantage to the early heat. Everything just seemed to be really familiar. So I boarded a couple horses of Dad's, a lead team on the 3-4 barrel. One horse I broke actually the first year he was running. Then Dad took him back, and he's had him for about 2 years. And then, I got to use that horse again, so it was fun driving him. He's gotten a lot better than when I had him, that's for sure. That's something horses just do. They get better and better. So, and then I used an old horse of Grandpa's that he had his last year running, and the rest were mine. And, they worked good for me. They worked better than they have all year, so things came together, and we ran away with it.
So last podcast, you kind of hardcore threw yourself under the bus on outriding and, making mistakes. What was last weekend like as an outrider, I guess? Do you need to throw yourself under the bus again?
No, we didn't have any trouble last weekend, I don't think. One cool thing that did happen is Brendan Nolan, when we were running, I think I was on the 3-barrel the first night, or maybe no, it was the second night, sorry, on a horse named Chase and my dad's. I have to use all my dad's outriding horses because I didn't have any in shape, obviously, because there's no outriding horses on the WCA, so I didn't have any. I had to use this horse of Dad's named Chase, and Brendan Nolan was riding him, and he seems to turn really tight around the barrel, and he actually happened to knock the barrel, and as Brendan was going around it, he caught it with his hand on top of the horse and stood it back up and made it out clean. So that was pretty cool. That's the closest thing we came to a penalty all week, myself or my outriders. And had he not done that, we wouldn't have got the brass at the end of the 4 days. So that was pretty cool. But other than that, it was smooth sailing.
Perfect. Sounds like a lot of fun. I guess moving now on to our interview with a well-known name in Chuckwagon racing. I'll let you introduce him since you know him better than I do.
Yeah, this week we got Les McIntyre. He's a friend of mine and a friend of my family's for a long time. He's been in the game for, I don't know how many years. He said it on the podcast many times. I just have horrible memories. So, it was great talking to Les, and hope you guys enjoy it.
All right, so now we're on the line with track announcer Les McIntyre. Les, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Dayton. How are you?
Good, thank you. Are you you're doing the Lloyd finals right now, are you not?
Yes, I am. I'm up in Lloyd, and it's kind of breezy and cloudy here today, but a little bit of rain overnight, but shouldn't dampen anything too much.
How many nights of racing you guys done? Just the one or two?
We've got 5 nights in total up here, and the finals on Sunday afternoon.
Oh, right on, right on.
Les, Sorry, Dayton. Les, what is it like? You announce on both the WPCA and the CPCA. What is the difference in, the racing in the two different associations?
Well, it's a brain test for me because I sometimes get a little lazy, perhaps, when I do the WPCA because I think this is my 34th year. So it kind of comes, I can recognize everybody at any given moment. And when I come to the Canadian Pro Association, different group of guys, And they do things a little differently over here. I mean, a wagon race is a wagon race, but just in the way they deliver things like running times. There are, I think, 23 wagons over here. So in order to make up a full show, 3 or 4 or 5 guys run a wagon 2 and a wagon 1, their A team and their B wagon. So it's a little different situation. For me, the biggest change probably is the different names and the recognition of the drivers on the track. I mean, when I'm watching WPCA races, I could do it in the dark. As long as I can see a form, I can recognize somebody. You get to have a photographic memory really quick in this business. So it's a little different format. I like the fact that I can do both, because when I get to the Calgary Stampede, it makes it much easier up there. Just for that reason, you're a little more relaxed with what's going on the track and in the infield kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Les, you said that you've been doing this for 34 years. What year did you start announcing them? And what got you into wagon racing with the WPCA and track announcing and stuff like that? You do some rodeo events, which I'm not sure if everybody knows as well. And you used to do auctioneering, is that right?
Yes, I still combine the three, Dayton. I got started, I went to school with a guy named Ross Nelson. Ross is a couple years younger than me, and he was working with Ole Willard, who would have been friends with your great-grandpa, Max Sutherland. And they had race horses all the time, the Willards, and Ross was over there training colts and riding colts. And then Ward Willard got into the business in 72 or 73. And Ross kind of got me interested in helping him out with a few things. And then about in 74, 75, I used to help him out a lot in the summertime and working horses and, the kind of things you do when you start at ground zero in the chuckwagon business. So I've come from mucking stalls and brushing horses and training out riding horses and wagging horses to where I'm at. But I think Ross Nelson was a very accomplished driver and a very good cowboy. And he and I knew each other through that association. And I started traveling with Ross and Ward in about 1975, actually going to shows. And my interest in chuckwagon racing probably began when I was, in my 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age. I used to listen to Irish Glass and Joe Carberry and Lauren Ball cover the chuckwagons at the Calgary Stampede back in the late 60s, early 70s. The late 60s, I should say. I was born in 54, so it always impressed me. We got to go to the Calgary Stampede 1 or 2 days a year. We lived 100 miles southeast of Calgary, still do. And I got to go to the Calgary Stampede, and that, when I was just a kid, I thought in the back of my mind, as probably you did and everybody else does, someday I want to be a part of the Calgary Stampede. I want to be a cowboy, a chuckwagon driver, rodeo, whatever.
Right.
Growing up on a farm, we rode lots, and I always used to go down behind the barns and play outrider and play wagon driver and all that kind of thing. But when fast forward to 77, 78, when I started traveling with Ross and Ward, Ross was a very good horseman. And, not to take anything from what Ward accomplished, but a lot of his success was probably due to Ross's skills as a trainer and a horseman. And they let me get involved more in driving, and I did a little bit of that in 81, 82, 83. And then I got hurt in 83, and I thought, there's two things that I don't have to be a successful chuckwagon driver. Number one was probably a big enough heart. My fear factor rose when I had a wreck. And you had pretty good backing and a pretty good bank account, and I had too many irons in the fire to just drop the world and go focus on wagon driving as much as I wanted to. I went to auction school in 1985 down in Billings, Montana, and was already involved in the auction business with Frank Mackinnon, the auctions at Vulcan. And when I got out of auction school in 85, that was the year that Ward Willard had decided to invite everybody down early in the spring before the season started and put on a little training show, wagon race show, and he got some sponsors and some people behind the game. I always remember Jerry Jeff Walker's band showing up, and I actually called my first Chuckwagon race off of Jerry Jeff Walker's sound system on stage at Willard's Place.
Wow.
And at the time, I'd been, Ross and Ward had both retired from wagon racing. And at the time, I was traveling a little bit with Richard Cosgrave and Tom Glass, and I got that under my belt. That I think that was in 1980. I think it was in 1984, actually, spring of 84. There was a guy there named Ken Anderson from Trochu, who at that time was kind of in charge of all the racetracks in Alberta, the B tracks, the Trochus, the High Rivers, and stuff like that. And I always remember he phoned me in the spring of 84, right after we did that little warm-up show at Ward's, which would have been in probably early May. 2 weeks later, in the May long weekend, our first show at that time of the year was in Trochu. And I don't know whether you've ever been to Trochu, Dayton, but your dad and your grandpa certainly were. And it was a little half-mile flat-cornered track, and they had horse races in the afternoon and wagons at night. And Ken Anderson said, "I hear you want to do wagon races." And I hadn't really thought about it much at that point. I did that little show at Willard that time just because everybody thought I was an auctioneer, so I should be able to do it.
Talk on the mic.
And, yeah, exactly. So I just kind of stepped out of my comfort zone and said to Ken, "Yeah, sure, I'll come up and do your wagon races," not having a clue what I was doing, basically. Well, about 4 days after that, he phoned me and he said, Joe Carberry doesn't really want to travel out here anymore. Joe had been doing the wagons and the horse races there for years, as he had done in Calgary. And he said, can you do horse races? Well, I lied through my teeth and I said, "Oh yeah, beat the cake, I can do horse races." He said, "Kate, you might as well come up and do the horse races too." So I remember the next morning, it was towards the weekend, I jumped in my truck and headed for Calgary and got up high on that grandstand. And for 3 days, I sat there and studied what Joe Carberry did calling horse races, so that when I did get to Trochu on the May long weekend, I was doing the horse races and the wagon races. And I'm pretty sure, Dayton, the first time you crawled in a wagon box and raced, your stomach was in a knot like all of us were the first time out.
Absolutely.
Well, multiply that by 10 when they threw a microphone in my face and said, "Call these horse races."
Yeah.
That was my first time. And, I don't think I ate or slept for 2 days. But anyway, that's where it got started. And the following year, I had the High River Committee phone me. And funny story, too, and we were in Hobema, I think, later that fall. And I had wrecked my back in 83 with the wagons, so that would have been the fall of 84. I was still kind of crippled up, and I was standing down in the infield with Tom Dorchester and a well-known radio TV personality whose name I won't mention was up in the stand in Hobema looking down on the track calling the Chuckwagon races. Tom Dorchester said to one of the guys from the Tanny Agriplex, he said, "Who is that guy? He's terrible." And they told him, and Tom turned to me and looks at me, and he said to the Tanny Agriplex man, he said, "Get this kid up there. He's way better than him." So they fired him that night, and I was up there the next night.
Wow.
Away we went, and then High River in 85, Trochu in 85, High River in 85, Hobema. I think I did 3 or 4 shows that year, and then it just took off from there. So I was very fortunate to have the background in the business and be able to have the right connections and people helping me out getting there. And, in the early days, in those days, there was a different announcer in every town depending on who the local radio personality was or the local auctioneer or whatever.
Right.
So I think I seen an opportunity to maybe bring a little consistency to the sport and have the same guy everywhere. And I don't even remember what year I started in Pinoca, but that was probably 25 years ago was the last of the show that I got where I completed the whole entire tour and got all the shows. And then, of course, took over from Joe in 2009, I think it was, somewhere there. So I've been very fortunate. God has gifted me with a voice and enough brain cells to get me by. So it's been really good, Dayton. I've enjoyed it. It's cool for me because I watched Ralph Egan and your dad and your grandpa. I said that backwards. Ralph Egan and your grandpa and your dad. And now to get into your generation, for me, it's cool. I love it.
Well, that's kind of what I want to ask you about a little bit later. But first, just want to backtrack. Like, I heard of quite a few stories about those races at Ward's place, because that was actually at his farm, was it not?
Yes, that's correct. In the early 80s there, 82, 83, I think it was 83 or 84 that he got the track complete and hosted this. It was sponsored by Child Find Alberta at that time, which was a missing child organization, and all the funds raised went to their operation. And I can't even remember how many wagons were there. I know I had drove a spare wagon for Richard in 83 that year before, and that's when I had my wreck out at Hand Hills and broke my back. I think actually it was Doyle Mulaney and Ralph Egan that were in the race with me. And so the next year, Richard was driving that same outfit. I told him when he goes to the top barrel, you really got to hold that lead team off because they'll duck on you. And I think he hit the number one barrel, and I actually swore on the microphone.
Oh, really?
And oh, crap, he hit the one barrel.
Yeah.
So that was a long, long time ago, and hopefully I've improved a little bit since then. But
those must have been some wild, wild times, hey? Like that long ago, especially at kind of like an impromptu race meet at Ward's Farms. I've heard stories and stories and stories about, well, actually from my grandpa mostly, about, you know, what times were like back then.
You know, it was, I guess we always, regardless of what we're talking about, look back at what we call the good old days. And at the time you're thinking, you know, we didn't appreciate that it was the good old days. There was probably a lot less pressure on drivers and outriders then. Well, there was a lot less pressure on outriders and drivers then, a lot less pressure because of the fact that, you know, they weren't racing for 100,000 or a truck or qualifications for this or that. But the guys were able to have a little more fun. The WPCA, as we know it today, was formed in 1981. Well, prior to that, back in the 70s, it was redneckville. Anything goes when the whistle blows.
Yeah, no doubt.
There was no alcohol and regulation back then. There was no drugs that I was aware of. But, I mean, there was a little whiskey flowing before race time. And a lot of them old boys, I always remember, and neither of these old boys were driving, but I always remember getting up early in the morning with Ross and doing chores and going over to his dad's camper, and Ronnie Glasses being there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they'd be playing crib and talking wagons, and they'd start their day on a glass of whiskey and ice and play cards all day until race time. But yeah, that was kind of the end of that era. When I come along in the mid 70s, you know, it was a little more controlled and a little more less wild. But there were still a few. I mean, today we settle things through protests and we settle things through rules and regulations. And I was still around in the day when your grandpa and your Uncle Kirk would well know that if there was a dispute, you went out behind the barn and the guy that walked back won the dispute pretty much.
Right.
So, yeah, there was a lot of respect for guys in the sport then. And fortunately, it's come to where it is today. And, I mean, we've taken your grandpa's hugely responsible for that. We've taken this sport to the level where it deserves to be on the stage of professional sports in the world. We're lacking in money, of course. We can't compare ourselves to the PBR, but it's the same kind of style of sport and marketing.
Yeah,
that should be marketed that way. Whereas a rodeo fan or a wagon racing fan, I can come to a show, park my camper, pay my ticket fees and whatnot, but I get to see the same guys 4 or 5 days in a row, and the tour concept gets me to keep track of who's doing what, who's doing where, and it's a marketable sport because of that. We are a group. We go to the show. We're there for the duration, and we roll on. Where, you know, in the rodeo business, it's a different world. It's just harder to market because of the amount of contestants. And from a fan's perspective, it's a fast, exciting sport similar to bull riding, the PBR. And I think we can do a better job than what we are. We've got a lot higher to climb yet as far as marketing. And marketing involves not only selling it to the fans. I think, to me, marketing has to involve getting fresh, new sponsorship money and upping the ante. You know, we should be running for $250,000 in some places. And, you know, that's the only way you're going to get the sport better, because as you well know, Dayton, the better sponsor you've got, the better horses you can buy. The better horses you can buy, the better you're going to compete and attract more sponsors. It's a big old wagon wheel. You start winning races, you get better sponsors. You get better sponsors, you get better horses, and it's just a big old circle.
Well, that's the thing too, is people talk about, like when everything was happening in Calgary and people were talking bad about wagon racing and stuff, and talking about, how the horses are mistreated, and just all this stuff. And I mean, one thing you always said is, if you died, you want to come back and be a Chuckwagon horse. You know what I mean? Just because they're looked after so well, and they want to be, they want to be racing all the time. They're thoroughbred race horses. We know that. I don't need to tell you that. And one thing that always come to my mind is these horses are getting a second crack at life. Obviously, we make that argument all the time, and more money in the sport would only increase that tenfold, especially if we got the sponsorship and the viewership and the that type of thing up to where I mean you or I believe it should be. So what I'm trying to say is that what you think the sport needs? How would you improve the sport if you could? Because I feel like everybody, wagon driver, outrider, fan, anybody who's passionate about the sport feels like there's definitely some moving forward that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a different way to look at this, the angle that I look at it. And I laughed when you said, I always make the comment, if I'm allowed to come back on this earth, yeah, you bet. I want to be Dayton Sutherland's left lead horse, or Luke Tournier's right wheel horse, or Mark Sutherland's lead team, because my goodness, think about it. You work 3 minutes a night, 3-4 nights a week. You get kicked out for 9 months of the year. That's a better job. There's no government job that good. But seriously, if you want to look at it the way I like to look at it, Dayton, we are the largest horse rescue society in Western Canada and probably the world.
Right.
We take 700-800 thoroughbreds a year whose race career is over at 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age, and we give them something to do for another 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And how many of your grandpa's old wagon horses are running out in the trees up there at Grand Prairie enjoying life? That's not the case for 99 point. That's not the case for 90. I don't know the numbers. I'm just throwing a number. It's not the case for 95% of the racehorses that are raised and run in North America.
Right. Yeah, they have quite a bit of a darker fate. That's no doubt about it. And not to mention, these horses, they like to run, they like to compete. And I don't know what it is about the training or the sport or how we're able to run them so much more often than, say, a racehorse. I believe it's because there's nobody on their back, and you can't force a horse to do anything, especially if it's a timed event. I mean, you're trying to run as fast as you can. And the other thing, too, is we'll race horses that are 20-some years old or 20 years old, 18, right around that area. It's usually at the end of the career for the Chuckwagons, and we can use those horses in the barrels just because they'll give it to you in the barrels. They'll get you out that much more clean, and then the other three can pack the load around the track. You know what I mean? Logan Gorst, we're kind of repetitive on this, but he talked about his 17-year-old left leader, Canadian Idol, who he won Calgary with this year. I mean, that horse, 10 years ago, his career was done on the track. You know what I mean? So it just baffles me that way that people just don't understand.
People on horses are very similar. You take a guy that is 65 years old, said, okay, here's your gold watch, goodbye. What's he going to do? He's going to go sit on the couch and watch baseball, football, hockey, chuckwagon racing, whatever. Sitting on that couch, he's going backwards. You take that racehorse that's done at 7 years old, kick him out in the pasture if he's lucky. If not, he enters the food chain in Europe and France and Japan. But take that horse, kick him out in your pasture, he won't live as long as the horse that you're out riding or driving just for the exercise factor alone. They're getting fed extremely well. They're getting exercised. And every doctor in the world will tell you, get off your couch, put your iPad down, get out there and go walk 5 miles a day, ride a bike or run. Of course you're going to live longer. It's no different than horses. You said a very important statement, Dayton. You cannot make a human being, an animal, do anything they don't want to against their will.
Right.
And I've said the story in the rodeo world. I've said it on the mic at a rodeo. When people say, You're making these horses buck. Think about it. When God created the horse, he gave him protection on the ground. He can kick his predators. He can bite his predators. He can run from his predators. That's his 3 areas of protection and survival. The one spot that he can't protect is right in the center of his back on his withers. So when you take a bucking horse and put a saddle on him and a rider on him, the only way that he can get rid of that quote-unquote predator is to buck him off. You take a saddle horse that I've spent months, years training to accept me on his back and do the things that we want him to do, and there again, they won't do it if they don't want to. It's the same in the horse business. You cannot make a horse do that. That's instinct. That's as natural as it can be. These thoroughbred horses are creatures of flight. You turn 30 horses, I don't care whether thoroughbreds, Persians, quarter horses, whatever. You turn a herd of horses into a field and throw in a grizzly bear and a mountain lion. What are they going to do? They're going to run in a group. That's their protection. The colts will be in the middle. The mares will be on the outside. The stout horse will be herding everything and chasing predators away. It's the same in this racehorse business and in the wagon business. You watch, and I know you've been on a few. Them wagons have left, and you're trying to get your outriding horse to the top barrel. Do you know why he's not going? Instinct tells him to get his butt out there and get with the herd. He don't care about turning barrels and missing barrels. He wants to leave the infield and get with his buddies and run with them, and they love to run.
Yeah.
And if you took all those thoroughbred horses in an open area where they could run for 50 miles, they would run for 50 miles.
Exactly. I say that all the time. Like, the first thing you do is turn out, a thoroughbred racehorse. So, like, we got a quarter section where we turn our horses out for the winter with a bunch of trees and stuff. First thing they do is run end to end, and probably a few times, and they get everyone else rowdied up, and all the other horses start running with them, and like you say, it's just one big pack, and you can just tell their tails are in the air, their ears are up, their heads are perked. They just feel so good. It's what they want to do.
They're born to run. You betcha.
Absolutely. Kass, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. One of the cool things I think I've always admired, Les, is, especially during Stampede, you try to educate everyone that's in that grandstand about chuckwagon racing. You try to explain to them what's going on and kind of like you break it down to basically chuckwagon 101. But in incidences where, there is a horse that goes down or a wreck, you really try to work with the people that are there so they understand kind of what's going on and don't, say, take to social media and but I guess kind of like start talking about stuff that they don't know what's going on there. How does that, as an announcer, like, what kind of goes through your mind in those instances?
Well, I've been in that instance. And I've been in that situation. And I guess that's why I think that I'm successful in a way as a track announcer, because I've been on that seat. I've taken the dirt in the face. I've taken the odd rock in the kneecap and the odd horseshoe that's whacked off my shoulder. So I've been down there in the dirt, and I've had issues. So the first thing I need to do is just everybody take a deep breath and be calm. It's not the end of the world here. So get everybody under control of their emotions. And social media is one of my, it annoys me at times. Yes, I realize it's very good. But just what you said, people blow up on social media that don't really know what they're talking about. If I were to go to the NASA Space Center with my cell phone and start taking pictures of things, I don't know what goes on down there. I don't, and I never will. But I do know what's going on with that horse and that. And how many times, Dave, have I said, just be calm, he'll get up, he's embarrassed, he slipped, he stepped over his harness, whatever. You can tell just from being involved in the sport long enough that the situation is as bad as everybody wants to make it immediately. It's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. Just take your time, let the right people down there deal with it. Don't send anybody in there that don't know what they're doing. And if that situation is handled properly, 90% of the time it's going to have a good outcome. 95% of the time it's going to have a good outcome. I learned a very important lesson from a guy named Bill Kaler, and he was the premier rodeo announcer in Calgary for years. He grew up in radio in Manitoba. He came to Calgary. He grew up in radio on the old 960 CPCA radio station. And he and I did a lot of shows together. And Bill Kaler told me one time, he and I were doing, I think it was Morris, Manitoba, or it could have been Dawson Creek. We'd been there for 4 or 5 days, and he and I were having breakfast, and he said, McIntyre, I want you to think about this. Tonight, when you start this show, you're used to doing the same thing every night, and we all try not to keep it the redundant, recorded thing that we do every night. He said, every night, you set your mindset on the fact that this is a whole new crowd. These people have never seen this before, and you are their first contact with the sport. So I tried to maintain that mindset, whether it's at the Calgary Stampede, at the Grand Prairie Stampede, at Medicine Hat Exhibition. In my mind, I'm playing to a new group every night. People that have never been there before in their life. And I think that helped keep it fresh. And when it comes to a situation in Calgary where we have an incident, let's just keep calm. And here's the way it really is, not the way social media or the press is telling you it is. Here's the straight facts. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does actually. That's really insightful, and I guess that 100% answers what I was wondering.
You kind of touched on it there, Les. I'm sure it must get slightly repetitive just because you've watched so many wagon races and stuff. And for me, it makes the race so much more exciting and intriguing. And when it's a real tight race, even recently when Kurt and Vern are battling it out, and the two top guys in the world and their brothers-in-law, and there's history there, and it's just everything a wagon fan could get right into. So what types of things keeps you excited during the race? Because sometimes when you're announcing, it just sounds like you get that much more into it versus when it's train of wagons or whatever. What types of things make you want to keep doing this?
I love watching the horses.
Okay.
I still, although I haven't drove a wagon for a few years, the last time I drove a wagon was with Tom Glass in a practice in Calgary one day, and I hadn't done it for 5 or 6 years prior to that, or more probably. And I remember going out with Tom on the track and taking them through their practice turn and blowing them out to the third quarter. And the next day I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. I was all jammed up. So I still remember what it's like. Pull into those barrels, the tension, feel the horses, the pressure, the horn. All that stuff is alive in me, alive and well. So I still have that passion. And,
right.
I've said many times, and not to discount any sportscasters in the world, but I've always said, if you've never been involved in that sport at any level, don't grab a microphone and tell us about it, because to me, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm fortunate that way, is because every time I get the same butterflies, more or less, or I get stall walking before a show, just the same as you guys do when you're hooking and getting ready to go to the track.
Right.
And I need to bring that to life every night. And so whether it's heat number 1 and they're all strung out like a freight train, I still think it's exciting. Whether it's heat number 9 and 4 guys are coming across the track and Vern and Kirk and Logan are all snuggled in there in the home stretch, to me it's just as exciting.
Right.
So, and the other thing that excites me is guys like you. Because to me, there's not enough guys like you coming into this sport. And the coolest thing for me in Dawson Creek was to watch you compared to where you were 3-4 years ago, when I thought, Dayton, maybe you should probably get a job in the oil patch or something. And then to watch how far you've come, and I mean, Kelly and I are really proud of my wife Kelly, not your grandpa Kelly.
Right.
We're proud of what you've accomplished, and that's what, to me, gives me that much more excitement and incentive. Because when I watched you in Dawson Creek and win and then come in and wind up 16th in the aggregate after 3 or 4 days, and then last night you get day money in Rocky, I thought, really, this is what this sport needs. This sport needed your grandpa to take it from where it was to where it is. Just like boxing had Muhammad Ali to take it from where it was to where it was 10 years ago.
Right.
Just like Gretzky and I'm, pardon my ignorance in hockey, but just like Gretzky and Lemieux and all those guys, and the modern day guys, the McDavids and whatever, to take it where it is now. You're that next group, the Logan Gorsts, the young guys coming up and getting it done. And that keeps me going. And doggone it, when you've raced for 30 years, Dayton, and won Calgary 3 times, I still want to be the track announcer, okay?
Absolutely. I was going to kind of ask you that. Like, is there young guys, right now, and the two I had written down were, for example, was Logan Gorst and Chance Vegan. Like, do those types of guys get you excited? Like, for me, it excites me when I see Logan Gorst, win the Calgary Stampede, or Chance Vegan have a day money run or whatever. Like, to some of these younger, 20-year-olds to 30-year-olds to, back in the day, that used to be a little bit of an older driver, but nowadays that's a pretty young driver, like, do those types of guys, get you excited about for where the wagon racing is going, the same way that, say, my grandpa or Reg Johnstone or those types of guys were when they were young?
Absolutely. I remember specifically Ronnie Glass, Tom Glass's dad, Jason's grandpa, telling me 30, 40 years ago. His quote was, "It should probably take you 20 years to win the Calgary Stampede." And back then he was right. Your grandpa come along, proved him wrong. Gary Dorchester proved him wrong. Some of the other guys proved him wrong. But that's how different wagon racing is today. And
right.
When we were in Calgary this summer and we got down to the semifinal rounds, any 8 guys could have won the Stampede. And as we go into next year and next season, and I mean, look at your top 15 or top 12 guys rather going into Century Downs. There's names in there that haven't been there.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of time before Kirk Sutherland retires. Luke Tournier retires. Names that have been there, done that. And Wayne Gretzky retired. Those guys retired. Who came up to replace him? Now we got the next generation of guns, and that's you guys. And of course, to me, that's a transmission that drives my interest big time, because I called a race with your dad in it, or your grandpa in it rather, and Ralph Egan in it. I drove with him, I called their races, and now I get to call Dayton Sutherland's race. And to me, that's it's a sign that I'm getting to be an old fart, but to me, it's good for the sport, because I want to be doing this in 20 years when you've won 3 world titles and you've won X number of Calgary Stampedes and on and on and on. So that is so good for the sport, what you are doing, what Logan is doing, what Chance is doing, that's how a sport is maintained. And it's now up to, I think we've got a good group of guys coming in, and it was good news to hear that we've got more guys coming to the runoff than we've had in a long time.
Yeah.
So we've done our homework. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, the wagon families and the wagon group have done their homework in replacement and sustaining the sport to about a mark of 7 out of 10. I think we could do more and do better, but we can only do so much because it's a money-driven thing.
Right.
We rely on the economy. The economy is driven by oil and agriculture and all the businesses that are related. Oil and agriculture, and maybe I've got them backwards, I don't know, but oil and agriculture drive what any sport does in Western Canada. If hockey is suffering, it's because my business ain't doing good enough to spend the money to buy season tickets.
Yeah.
Football, baseball, whatever. Rodeo chuckwagons, no different. Those two sports in themselves, rodeo and chuckwagon, are more reliant, in my mind, on our immediate Alberta oil and agricultural commodity, or oil and agricultural, basis, because we rely on the support from people that are doing well in the oil industry. Our ag industry, a lot of the people on our committees are involved in the ag industry in our smaller towns, not so much Calgary, but in our smaller centers that we need to keep wagon racing going. We need the small shows. We don't need to go outside of Alberta or in Saskatchewan or a little into BC. We don't need to go across the border. It's a lot easier to bring the fans to the races than it is to take the races to the fans. It costs too much money to go down south, down east. Let them come here. put us on 7 or 8 or 9 of the best tracks available. And you know what I'm talking about. We've got 2 really good tracks, and we've got some that are okay, and we got some that, why are we here? But we still need those smaller shows to keep us where we're at, to attract fans. And I think that's one, if I'm going to give social media anything, perhaps it is bringing newer, younger fans into the sport. But that's a two-sided coin because, and I'm getting off on a rant here, but to me, that may be bringing in new fans. But where I get questions in my mind about social media and marketing, let's not put everything we do at a race show on social media and put it out there for free. We still need those people to come to town, buy the seats, so the committees we work with survive. Right. They make no money off of social media. That doesn't put anybody in the seats. Very seldom. I'd like to know the numbers. I'd like to know at i.e. Pinoka Stampede, Grand Prairie, even Calgary, how many people now say, well, I'm not going to load up my family for and spend $200 and drive here and get a room and yada, yada, and watch Chuckwagon racing. We can do it off our cell phone, out in the tractor, out in the horse, out in the farm, wherever, in town. So let's be careful. Let's not give this sport away on social media and all the other things that are sending it out there for free. Because we need people to come to town and buy the seats and support the committees. If they don't have the support, and that's down since sponsorship is down, so we've got to make sure that we, don't burn down the barn where you're feeding your horses.
You're in Lloydminster right now for the CPCA finals, but I don't know if you're okay trying to take a quick step over to the WPCA. Worlds are going to be happening when we release this episode. That top 4, I haven't seen much movement in it. Again, there is Kurt. He's in that top 4, as is Kirk and Vern and all those guys. What do you kind of see in that top 4, and what do you kind of see going into Worlds next week?
I guess it's going to depend on what's happening in Rockies this weekend. I see Jason has slipped to 14th and Chance is up in 13th. I forget who's on the bubble in 12. I just looked here a little while ago. But when we get to Century Downs, I guess it's going to depend on how their infield and track is put together, and hopefully it's fair for everybody. It's a tough competition. Don't ever ask me to pick a winner because I am the worst and I don't like to hex anybody. But if all plays out the way I like to see it play out, without picking winners, this is probably going to be the most exciting year-end competition we've witnessed in a long time for the format and for, like Dayton said, the group of guys that are involved in that final 12. I wouldn't want to be anywhere in that standings thinking that I am going to win this thing, because nobody from Vern and Kurt on down should get in the mindset that this is going to be a cakewalk, because it certainly won't be.
You kind of touched on it, like how exciting this is going to be, and we talked about it on the show before, what Century Downs is doing for the sport, after the whole invite thing to the big show there, it kind of didn't really make a huge difference so much for the second half of the tour. Guys would start laying back and start breaking horses for next year and stuff. And I mean, there's a few top guys that could win the world and whatnot, but it didn't really make that much of a difference. But this year, a shift that I saw was that maybe guys, didn't really want to run some of their best in Dawson, partly because of the rainouts and stuff like that. But maybe also they only run their good hook there one night, or they're only going to run their good hook in Rocky one night or something like that, just because they want to keep their horses that much more fresh for the big show coming up. So I always thought, think that that's a great addition to the sport. And what I'm trying to ask is, with this addition, to the tour and stuff, do you think the sport is moving onward and upward? Do you think that we're going in good places? Do you like the direction that Chuckwagon Races is headed?
I would have to say I do, but cautiously.
Right.
I think I don't know exactly what the next year or two is going to bring. I have a mindset where I would like to see it go. I think that as a wagon driver, you, in previous years, you did your shopping, you know what you've got this fall, you do your spring training, now you know where you got to be this season. Now you've got, and you're grappling with a master at it, you cannot think 4 months down the road for this season. You have to think now 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah.
And I think that's how formats have changed. Calgary Stampede, for instance, you know, you used to go 8-9 days and work for the finals. Now you go 8 days in a semifinal. Same in Ponoka, 4 days in a semifinal. And the overall tour concept and the changes that have been made now will take training, buying, horse management, like you said. Don't use up your A-team 2 shows prior to the final. Keep them fresh. That's
right.
I mean, you guys must lay awake at night thinking about that because you have to now, because Kurt's doing it, Kirk is doing it, Vern is doing it, everybody that's up there is doing it. You have to do it.
For sure. Well, and there's so much strategy that goes into it nowadays. Like, are you going to keep your horses fresh? You know, how do they come out of the barns in the morning? Do they look fresh? Do they feel fresh? You know, are they you know, running around and stuff? Not to mention, like we were talking about earlier, the track conditions, who you're hooked with, what barrel you have on Monday, what barrel you have on you know, Friday. Like everything just plays into it. So it definitely is interesting. You know, about all those little things that go into it, and that's something that we want to. Well, that's kind of the reason why we started this podcast, because, you know, I said it to a few people that, like, you know, Joe Rogan has a huge podcast right now, obviously, right? Probably the biggest in the world. And he's a commentator for the UFC. And, you know, when people are watching a UFC fight, I think without Joe Rogan, they just see, you know, 2 half-naked dudes wrestling in a ring. But when Joe's commenting on it, you know, it's like, oh, well, look at his hand placement here. Look at this. Look at that. You know, he's going for this choke. He's doing that. And that's something that we want to bring to the podcast. We want to bring more details to the wagon industry and the wagon world, and let the fans know more of what's going on, how guys are moving their hands, how horses are working, that type of thing. And I think that's also what you do too. And I love when you do it, like in a race. You talk about, oh, look at that horse and look at that, you know, how that outfit started and that type of thing. So I do love that.
I got to tell you a story, and I'll use this as a stepping stone because, and I hope all 36 wagon drivers are listening to this. Early this spring, before we started in Grand Prairie, or maybe it was in Grand Prairie, I sent out a blanket email to every wagon driver on the WPCA tour. Send me your horse stories. If you're driving an equine award winner from last year tonight, send me a story. If you're driving a unique horse that's come out of wherever with a unique history, send me your story so that I can use it on the track.
Yeah.
That started 9 race shows ago or wherever we're at on our tour. I've had maybe 4 or 5 all year.
Oh, really?
Before we get into Calgary, I sent out the same blanket email. I texted Kim Carey in the CPCA, tell your guys to send me their emails. I got 2 responses all year, or all during Calgary Stampede. So, I mean, if you've got a horse that's unique, we've got technology. Text me, email, send me the story so that I can use it at night, because I think that's what interests fans too, just like you were saying about wrestling.
Yeah.
Watch that left lead horse. Watch him fold into that right lead horse and then pull him sideways left. And to me, that's a perfect left lead horse. You lean on that right guy at the top barrel and suck him off his feet at the bottom barrel. Stuff like that, because I've been there. I know what they look like when they're coming out of the barrels. Watch a horse, a wheel horse that backs up and pulls that collar halfway up his neck, and when that horn blows, you get bruises on the back of your thighs from when he hits the tongues. That kind of thing. You know, that's what makes the superstars. Watch a lead team coming down the home stretch, and you can almost read their mind. They're thinking like, dude, I'm going to outrun you. If we weren't tied together, I'd be a half a mile ahead of you, you know.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And horses are so fascinating. You can learn so much from watching horses walk around the corral, walk around the pasture, come into the barrels. They're funny as heck, because there's 2 or 3 guys that have a left lead horse that's curving his neck back looking at the crowd. And as a wagon driver, that's intimidating to me. Like, hey, pay attention, look forward. Watch that lead outrider. Don't be gawking around like a kid at his first party, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Stuff like that I find humorous, and I wish I had more time to relate it, or I have the advantage in Calgary of going over the replay. And that's where I have a lot of fun, at the Calgary Stampede, because once the finish line is crossed and the outriders are by, comment a bit, and then they've got the best camera crew in the world in Calgary. And Bruce Yost knows exactly what to pick up on that camera. He'll bring things to my attention by just showing it on the video screen that like when Mitch Pertner fell out of his wagon, I was watching something other than Mitch that night. And when he played it up, I thought, holy crap, how could I have missed that? Little stuff like that, there's so much going on down there, and times 4. And there's some amazing thoroughbred athletes out there that we need to know more about. And I think that's where I'm going to send that email out again when we get to Century. If you've got a unique horse down there that's a star, tell me about him so that I can brag on him. And I will, generally speaking, because Dallas Dorchester taught me this a long time ago, don't brag on him too much in his practice turn, but once he's won the heat, then brag on him. You can mention him. I always remember in High River in about 1987, 8, 9, whenever Dallas was at his peak, he had won High River 5 times. He came into the number 1 barrel. I was bragging on him. They blew the horn, and he hit everybody's barrel, including his own, wound up with 30 seconds in penalties. And he walked over to me after the races, and I thought, I'm going to die. He said, don't ever brag on me again until I'm done.
Yeah.
So, and then speaking, when you talk about calculating your horsepower, I think Dallas was one of the first guys. Shirley videoed every race. Dallas would spend his evenings and halfway through the night. If he was hooked with your grandpa tomorrow, he'd watch all the videos of that week that Shirley had taken of Kelly and Ralph and Kirk, whoever he was going to be hooked with. He was the most calculating wagon driver in his day, using technology that we had then, which was in big old bulky video cameras. And he would go and watch and study horses and watch his competition and watch his own horses. Now, why isn't that wheel horse keeping up with his partner? Or why isn't this lead horse turning evenly? Try and figure out why. He was a master at that. And you guys probably do that today because everybody's got a cell phone camera, so you can video. And I know your dad does. I've watched it. Yeah, and that's a place where technology has improved the sport as well, and the proper use of technology has improved the sport as well.
It's interesting that you talked about giving the horse stories because we try to do that on the podcast. We have, of course, Logan's Canadian Idol, which hopefully he's emailed you about. If not, let us know, and we'll send you the information he told us.
He is not.
But
I can name the horses that have been sent to me. But yeah, to me, that's important. I mean, I spend a lot of time bragging on the sponsors and the driver, this many wins, yada, 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 here's where we're at in the standings. But I also want to be able to have the time to say, there's Canadian Idol, and here's a superstar. That horse that Dayton's got on the right wheel has come off this track in such and such time, and he's won $500,000 on the track. And he couldn't outrun his shadow on the track, but now he's winning day monies. This kind of thing, that to me, that's interesting. To me, the horses that have come from the track that are just horses, there were nobodies. They, like I say, they were consistently 7 and 8 place runners. Now we've taken them to the wagon business, and they're on the lead or the pole of the winning outfit. We talked about extending these horses' lives. Now we're going to make them superstars because they're good at what they do. To me, that's a cool story. If this horse was consistently in 7th and somebody bought him off the track for $1,500 and now he's an $80,000 lead horse, yay. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on? It's been an hour and a half and I feel like we've covered a lot, but I mean, I'm sure you could talk for hours on this stuff.
I just think that, there's a lot of time to get worried about where this sport is going, because not only does this sport require a consistent, committed group of wagon drivers and their wives and families. Not only does it require a good economy with interested sponsors that want to support the sport and help their own cause through sponsorship, but more than anything, this sport requires a management team and a leadership team that's willing to step out and take it to where it needs to be. Period.
I couldn't agree more, and that's something that even Grandpa mentioned on his interview, that's where the sport's hurting as well, is structurally with drivers and unions and stuff like that, and how it's run and how it's managed. We've always been kind of or at least since I've been around, kind of mom and pop shop. You know what I mean? Like, there's been lots of drivers on the board and stuff like that. We kind of all do it in-house, but to be like a true professional sport, I definitely think we need to, and there's been really good guys, especially in the last few years, some have fallen out of it, due to personal reasons or whatnot, that are wanting to, bring the sport to the next level. Really, really smart guys that have built enormous companies and whatnot and done great things in their life. Want to bring the sport up and bring it to the upper level, and it's all about that management and structural side of the things that a lot of people don't think about. But I know there's a lot of people right there with you that do agree that I think that's what the sport needs.
It has to be run like a business, and it's never before been a tougher business to run, given that we are dependent on other businesses.
Right.
Committees are businesses. Sponsorships are businesses. We can't come into a business environment expecting to survive not being run like a business equal to those that we're dealing with.
For sure. It's standard B2B marketing and structuring and stuff like that. Absolutely.
There was a time when I always used to use a line when people ask me how things are going, and I said, well, Chuckwagon racing will survive in spite of itself. I don't think that holds true anymore. We've got too many people watching us, good, bad, or ugly. We got too much competition in the world of entertainment.
Yeah.
Whether it's social media, live, there's too many things late teenage kids could go see that are every bit as exciting or more exciting than Chuckwagon racing. The Western world is being drawn away from our Western roots and our Western heritage by all those factors. We and rodeo have to be that much better at leadership in order to be able to survive in that now world market. We weren't a world market 20 years ago. We are on Facebook and Twitter and social media. We are now a world market, so we need to come up to a business level that allows us to survive in a world market.
Absolutely, and to be savvy enough with the social media, like you said, there's pros and cons to it. One pro that I do like is that you just said we are on a world platform now, that the WPCA is streaming live on Facebook, and there's people talking, from across the states, and eventually, I'm assuming anywhere Western culture has any interest in anybody, eventually we will reach those spots and locations, and it'll definitely take a small village, if not a small city, to take this sport where it needs to go.
Another cool part about social media was that Stampede Guy Fieri was there, and they pulled him up on stage, and he used the analogy. He said, "This is the NASCAR of horse racing," and
yes.
That's what I thought was really cool. And then I went on my Instagram a short while later, and he had shared that with his followers. And he has like 2 million followers, if not more.
Yes, exactly. That's how intimidating the world of marketing in professional sports is. And I mean, my wife watches his show constantly, his food show, his diners, drive-ins, and dives. Yeah, he's got a big following. And for that guy to come on stage and give us that exposure, we had better be ready to step up to the plate and live up to what he's bragged on us as being.
Definitely will be keeping us on our toes. Les, that was great. Thank you so much for coming on. I knew I wanted to talk to you. Like when I decided to do the podcast ever, the first person I thought of was Logan and Kurt. Talk to the two of the top guys. And then when me and Kass were kind of brainstorming right after we did the first one, seeing how it was going to kind of lay out, I thought, I want to talk to Les McIntyre because that guy has watched more wagon races than I think anybody ever has. Because, I mean, and there's been guys who have been around, like I said that to my mom and Dad when we were having dinner the other night, and Dad agreed with me. And Mom said, well, I don't know, Grandpa's, or, I say Grandpa, Kelly's watched a lot of races in his life too. Well, Kelly's been at a lot of race meets, but nobody's been there, up in the or up in the stand, up in the bird's eye view, actually watching the races. And you have to watch them and calling them and to see all these guys compete. So I'd love to have you on, and I'm sure Kass would too in the future as well, because we could talk for hours about guys that we haven't even, touched on, like you said, George Norman and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
For sure.
Thank you again to Les for joining us on the After the Ninth podcast. Let's quickly talk about Century Downs here, Dayton. Let's talk about, it's a new show. It's brand new to the WPCA. What's the track like?
The track's really good. I was really happy with it. Been on some different tracks all year compared to this one. This one's like really, really high quality. They have race horses here, flat races. They have standard breds, so there's no holes in these tracks. It's a little bit heavy, I think, for a lot of guys' liking, but that's just something that you're going to get with a first year show and whatnot. So no, I'm happy with the track. There's no rocks, there's no holes. You can turn your horses loose, you can trust it. So it's been really good so far the first 2 days.
So what you might not know about me, Dayton, I don't think we've ever talked about this, is I got to spend some time out here last year for standard bred racing, because you're not my first podcast. I had a show called Horse Racing Central, so, I mean, I'm sorry you're not special anymore.
No way. Yeah, I actually came out here last year too for the flat races. I was actually picking up a racehorse for my cousin Mitch to become a Chuckwagon horse. So yeah, no, it's a great place. The barns are nice. The facility here, like where the grandstand is and stuff like that, it's really nice. They got big screens. It's a great place so far, and I think it's just going to get better and better as years go on.
Perfect. Well, I guess next weekend you'll be heading out to the runoff. We'll find out who's going to take those bottom 6 spots. So how do you feel going there? And do you have a mindset there, or you're right now focused on this?
No, I'm actually, even since Rocky, the reason I took the lead team from my dad was to try him out for the runoff. So I didn't just kind of go into the runoff cold, trying new horses or whatnot. So Dad's going to use his good horses here. So that's why I had to try him in Rocky and use him there. So I'll be using those 2 of Dad's again during the runoff, and then the rest will be mine. And I just don't have enough horses in my barn really to stay competitive right now. I got a lot turned out at home, and they're on grass and stuff. I just didn't pack this year because I was going to break some new horses. So long story short, the runoff's been the focus since I decided to come on back to the WPCA tour. That's actually why I did it. I think I said that before. So, we're just looking forward to next weekend, and I think we'll be tough. There's a couple guys that I'm sure are going to outrun me, which will be Chance Bensmiller and Chris Molly. Those guys are top wagons in the CPCA. So besides those guys, I think I'll hang in there pretty consistent against everybody else, and just stay clean, stay consistent, and I'm sure I'll make it out fine. And if I don't, it's probably going to be my fault, not the horses, because I got all the opportunity in the world. So.
And that's the end of this week's After the Ninth podcast. Remember to subscribe and like. Comments are always welcome. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we will see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
That's a day in the country.